On here, now that we've set up our render settings and we can use those for the playblast window, we'll go into the window, playblast again, and this time we'll choose, instead of from window, we'll choose from render settings. So this will give us a better idea of what our final framing will look like and not necessarily our final rendering. So let's go ahead and apply it, and then you'll see now I have the animation playing in the frame, so that looks pretty good, right? You know, that this I can now bring into Premiere or After Effects or any kind of editing software. It won't have, you know, all the things that I would have in my final render, like alpha channels and things like that. But this is either good enough for, you know, doing an animatic, which is a rough animation, or a pre-visualization, we call it. So let's move on a little bit more here, dive deeper into some lighting and camera setups. So one of the things you're going to want to do is add lights, right? So I don't have any lights in this scene at all. So I usually like a simple 3-key lighting setup. So I'm just going to go ahead and create, I'm just going to create a simple light here. So I'll go ahead and create a directional light. So I'll go to create lights, and we're going to create a directional light. So the directional light is exactly that. It's sort of like the sun or something. It casts rays just in one direction. It really doesn't have like a position. It's really just the angle that makes a difference. The positioning is pretty irrelevant. It's really just the angle that it's striking everything in your scene. So it's sort of this infinite light source, unlike with point lights and other things like that. So, you know, we can test this to see how it looks by using the render preview window. So you can just go ahead and preview render that and see what it looks like. And you'll see, so right now I'm using the Arnold renderer, and I don't want to do that at this stage because I'm not using any Arnold shaders. So I want to change that to Maya render and see how it looks. So if you're getting that really dark look, it's because you're attempting to use the Arnold renderer. Now you'll notice that the Maya renderer is much slower. Yeah, it's less efficient than the Arnold renderer, but at the same time, you know, we didn't have to set up any complex shaders or custom shaders. So anyway, there's the scene right there, and you'll notice a few things about the scene that we haven't set up yet. So one of the things is that, you know, we don't really see any reflections on the ground. We don't see any shadows on the ground. We don't see, you know, a lot of the things that we'd expect a final render to have. And so this looks similar to the hardware render, right? It doesn't have, you know, a whole lot of the interesting things that we want a final render to have in it. So I'm using a really old machine here, and you can see why it's rendering kind of slow. But I'm going to close this out, and we'll go ahead and just set up a few things here. So in the render settings, you're going to want to change some things here. So in render settings, we're going to go to the Maya software tab here. And so we're going to change this. I'm going to leave it on low quality for now just because I'm really just previewing it, but we can turn on the ray tracing. So ray tracing is going to allow us to see our reflections, right? So we can turn that on. Now the other thing we want to see is shadows. Now shadows are really light specific, so we want to make sure that we select our light source here, and we'll go into our attribute editor, and without turning shadows on, they really don't appear. So you have two types of shadows. You can use depth map shadows, which work both in the Maya software, both with or without ray tracing. I'm just going to use the ray trace shadows, so I'll make sure that those are turned on. By default, they should be, and we'll go ahead and render this out. So this will take a little bit longer to render, but you'll notice now that I should be able to see my reflections in the scene. I should be able to see my shadows in the scene, and really depends on how sophisticated the lighting is. So let's take a look at this. Now you notice really the surface looks kind of plain here. I really don't have much else in the scene. I have, you know, just really the ball and the plane, and that's it. So the only place we're really going to see reflection is from the ball, and the only place we're going to see a shadow is from the ball and from the main light there. So one of the things I'll want to set up in here as well is maybe a few other lights. So I have my main light right now, which is the directional light casting into the scene. And then I'm going to also want to add some other things in there. So you'll see that you can barely see the shadow here. I'm not really seeing any reflections, but if you look very carefully, you can see this here. So we'll get into a little bit more of this later when we launch our final render, but let's just take a look at the scene right now. So for now we have a hardware lighting, and so if we want to see hardware lighting, if we hit number 7, so if we go to 7, we should see how the scene looks with the hardware lighting. So you'll notice when I move the light around here, I can kind of change the effect of that light, but you can kind of move it around in the scene here. So this is kind of accurate to the hardware lighting. Remember before, when there was no light at all, right, it just was black like this. So make sure you hit the 7 key to see the preview of lighting.